You know, the club is a platform for discussion, for debate. We're not a lobby, we're not an environmental movement. We try to inform, to share, to inspire. And we are very pleased that we have the opportunity to present and launch the last report to the Club of Rome, Extracted.
It's a pleasure and honor for me to introduce the new book by Ugo Barri, the new report to the Club of Rome. It was actually first published in German, but it was written in Italian, wasn't it? And later translated into English, or was it written in English in the first place? Okay, well, but it comes from Italy in a sense. Now it is there. And let me go back into history a little bit. 42 years ago, the Club of Rome became famous for the publication of The Limits to Growth, which was a blockbuster kind of publication, sold many million times, I don't know, in 50 languages or so, and contained the message that if the world continues the road that it had taken before, by something like 2020 or so, many resources will be exhausted, including oil and gas and copper and many other things. Now, this was based on the geological knowledge of the time, the late 1960s, and based on a relatively rigid mathematical model linking those resources with industrial production, which would consume some, with food, with population, and so it was kind of clear that if you just link in a fixed manner such parameters, you would run into disaster at some stage. Soon, of course, after the big excitement and fears around the limits to growth, some optimists came, not least John Maddox, who was then the chief editor of Nature, who launched an attack on pessimism, the Club of Rome being pessimistic, and said, no, we can do everything. And then there was a geologist, John Tilton, who was also an optimist, who said, under today's rates of copper consumption, the Earth crust contains enough copper to last for another 120 million years. Now, in practical terms, this was, of course, nonsense, because nobody would do it. But at least it showed that some of the assumptions of the Club of Rome had been wrong, leading to a very negative image among many people, including Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, etc., of the Club of Rome. But in the meantime, the Club of Rome went on writing very good reports. I won't tell them, but essentially all of clear analysis, but also optimistic terms of what you can do. And then came Ugo Bardi, who knows modern geology, and agreed that some of the assumptions of the early 1970s were wrong. That indeed, like Tilton said, there are a lot of minerals still left in the ground, but as the concentration gets poorer and poorer, the amount of energy needed to extract a kilogram of manganese, of molybdenum, of copper, of gold, or whatever, is increasing. And so is the pollution. So the environmental damages, also the damages to the health of people, the nature, biodiversity and all that, all those damages would be increasing the more we are using those resources. Therefore, we see more or less the same challenge as in 1972, that we are better off taking the limits serious. Now, we are very fortunate that this is possible. Let me give you one example. We have another member of the Club of Rome, Gunther Pauli, who shows how you can cascade minerals, energy, water through the system, always producing added value and jobs, and at the end, using much less primary natural resources for good added value. This is a fabulous story. Also, Gunther Pauli's book, The Blue Economy, has now been translated into 38 languages, and the Chinese President Xi Jinping said to Gunther Pauli, I want to speak with you because this is very important for China. So we are back on stage, this time with much more optimistic messages. An Australian writers team and myself have written a book called Factor 5, which is also a report to the Club of Rome, showing that a 5-fold increase of resource productivity is available, meaning that all our estimates of demand for natural resources and energy are wrong, provided we do it better. And then fabulous firms like Umicore, who specialize on extracting from trash or other things what is valuable and can be reused. And then there are intermediate strategies such as remanufacturing or refurbishing, not shredding an automobile or what have you, but leaving it basically intact and only replacing what is worn out or what is no longer modern enough. So those are other strategies into which the Belgian industry or others can invest and become richer by doing it and save the environment for our grandchildren. So with Ugo Bargli's wonderful new report, what's exactly the English name now? Extracted, yeah, okay. With his report Extracted, we are on much safer grounds than we used to be with limits to growth. We see the size of the challenge, and at the same time, reading other reports, which are also indicated in yours, we have a great chance of making this a more sustainable, better world, not only for our generations, but for future generations. And that essentially has been the mission of the Club of Rome since the beginning. We are very happy that the EU chapter of the Club of Rome, under its president, Marc Dubrul, is playing a great role in communicating that into the Brussels community. So Marc, thank you very much again for arranging this meeting, and I'm now keen to listen to that wonderful video. Thank you very much.
Ernst van Wertzaker, you have heard. Ugo Bardi, you were introduced to him in a moment ago. Jorn Verbeek is a new full member of the Club of Rome, and I'm very pleased that he accepted to moderate the debate, because I know many of you are fed up of seeing always the old face of the president. There is Denis Goffo. Thank you very much indeed, Denis. Denis is member of the executive committee of Umicore and also chief technical officer of that company. So Jorn, you take over from me now. Thank you.
When I saw the movie, I think I was educated in secondary school with the idea that we are borrowing the planet from our children or grandchildren. But when you see the stats and you see the movie, I mean, we are not borrowing the planet from the children anymore, it's our generation. And I think when we've been talking about limits, well, it has come quite close. So I was wondering, Ugo, what was in your mind the moment you started writing the book, and why was it important to present it as a report to the Club of Rome?
Well, it's an interesting question. Of course, I think every one of us in this room has a history that somehow brought him or her here, because you all have a point, a moment in life where you discover that what they tell you in TV is not everything. And in my case, if you're just curious about that, I remember very well. I can tell you the story, actually. It was in September 11, 2001. I was in the United States. I was in Berkeley. And in the United States, the whole thing happened in the morning. So I saw this disaster, the Twin Towers falling. And I was a bit shocked. And I don't know about you, when I'm shocked, I tend to go in a bookstore. Because it calms my mind. And so I did that. And I stumbled into a book about peak oil. And that was bad. I can tell you 2 shocks in one day. And the second one was even worse than the first. So I don't know if you know about peak oil, but peak oil is a line of thought that went in parallel with the limits to growth. The limits to grow, actually the same idea. The limits to grow is aggregate, it's all mineral resources. Peak oil is only oil, but it's the same idea. Same idea, resources do not run out all of a sudden. They become more expensive to extract, and this has consequences. Of course, the limits to growth was more complex, a more sophisticated theory. For the time, it had limits, of course, as Ernst said, but it was very good for the time. And the thing that brought me to the limits to growth was the idea of putting together these 2 different fields, peak oil studies. I still have you see this little thing is the pin of ASPO, the Association for the Study of Peak Oil. Then I discovered that the 2 ideas, peak oil and peak civilization, which was the idea of the limits to grow, are the same thing. The same idea, the same model, the same approach to the exploitation of natural resources. And that's a very interesting story. I mean, you can spend 15 years of your life, if you like.
Hugo, why was it important to present as a report to the Club of Rome?
The Club of Rome. But then I went back to the early study, 1972, The Limits to Growth, that I had read in Italian back in 1972 or 73, and then there was this story that the report was all wrong. I mean, those of you who are a little bit white, probably remember that. Those of you who are black, either you don't remember or you are tricking a little bit. But I had this feeling that there was this story had to be rediscovered. Because everybody, up to now, still now, as Ernst said, still now people are saying that the first report was all wrong. Was limited, but not wrong, not at all. And there was a need also to understand why a report, which for the time was so sophisticated, so good, so well done, so innovative, so groundbreaking, it had undergone such a demolition by these people that Ernst mentioned. I mean, it's a fascinating story that how easy is for propaganda to convince people that something is completely wrong when it is not. And it's very easy. And this is still happening. It's very easy to if you mention the limits to growth, people would say, oh yeah, that whole report was all wrong or nothing true in that. And that's the awesome power of public relations, as we call them now. It is being used now against climate science. I don't know if you know something about this, but some forces, some dark forces within society are unleashing this tremendous negative power against the whole field of science to convince people that we don't have a problem with climate. Instead, we do. We do. And one interesting point that this problem was hinted already in 1972. They didn't know yet exactly, but they had found that there was something that was going to worsen in time and bring problems. And this is why I say you should not watch TV normally if you can.
Ernst, I think you've been in this field for quite some time. You've been talking, as Ugo did, about optimism and pessimism. Some critics there say that we lost the momentum a bit. I was really, always when I hear you, I get quite inspired. What are for you in the last decades the moments of optimism where you say, we did make a change and we're able to do so in the next few decades?
One was the reaction in America to the terrible disaster of the Hurricane Katrina, or the disasters of New Orleans, and the former US Vice President Al Gore simply bringing the public into the feeling something goes massively wrong and can destroy our cities unless we really change. But then, of course, came the Bush era and 9/11 and all that, and all this was kind of crumbling. Another good moment, I feel, was that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change brought it home to the world population that we need to do something to maintain at least a maximum 2 degrees warming, and that it is possible. So that was also good. But again, the fracking people and the coal lobby and others, the Koch brothers in America, so began to really fight a war against this kind of prognosis. And then I felt it was a good sign that the Chinese became very, very serious about decarbonization, about efficiency increases, etc. And then let me tell you one nice anecdotal kind of good moment I had. The famous company Unilever got a new chairman, Paul Polman, who, when coming into office, said, "I don't want to publish quarterly reports any longer," leading to an uproar of the shareholders, of the stock exchanges, etc., saying, "What an evil CEO, not respecting us as shareholders." And he said, "Well, look, those who are now leaving the stocks of Unilever, I don't want to have as shareholders. I want my company to do long-term things." And surprise, surprise, after a couple of months, the stocks recovered and got better and better and better, much better than they used to be before he announced that. That shows to the world that the ideology of quarterly reports, which essentially means robbing nature, is not necessarily a good business strategy.
Denis, we heard a lot. I think you also know the story. Do you have the same idea in mind when you look back at the history of Umicore, the change from Union Minière to Umicore? Were the same incentives when you did make the change as a company to really tackle a global challenge? Or was it purely a business case?
I think a bit of both. I think I was born with the Club of Rome, my age, but the previous generation, they somewhat integrated in their way of thinking. And so they nurtured the company in saying, okay, we need to do something about it. By the way, we don't publish quarterly results at our company. We publish twice a year because it's already quite short. But we also our chairman decided not to publish quarterly results, and I think we have good shareholders. And the same chairman initiated and tried to find out what we had in our hands, the knowledge that Umicore had, which was about refining metals, putting them to use, and putting them to use, among others, by recycling and closing the loop. I think this is something which is very important. If you see a presentation about Umicore today, you see closing the loop. This is something we want to do. This is about recycling, what Hugo Bardi mentioned. We want to make sure we are efficient in not losing metals during our processing, not losing metal at the end of life of the products that are made, and very importantly, use as little energy as possible to extract these metals. So this has been a thinking of our management, but this spreads very, very fast in a company, because when you have a clear leadership from chairman, CEO level, you are really convinced about what you are doing, and you do what you say, and you make a big business case out of it. That's very important, of course, for a company. And you make a business case out of it, then it spreads. And you have people now willing to join Umicore because of what it is. Because we do the right thing. We do recycling, and we are sustainable. We are a business. We pay salaries to our employees, of course. But we motivate them also by the fact that we do something that addresses the problems of scarcity. Scarcity is one of the 4 mega trends that we identified at Umicore. We see it as an opportunity for us, because we are better extracting in a better way the metals that are. And it's not only recycling. I think this is something, the mining industry can be very inefficient sometimes, because they focus on one metal. And they have a lot of byproducts. And because they are not focused on these byproducts, they are lost. They get lost in the tailings, they get lost in the byproducts. And this is something we also do. We go to the mining industry, we partner with the mining industry, and we tell them, look, we can help you getting the indium out of your zinc mine, or not losing the precious metals that are lost in your slags. And this is another part of what we do. And this is always using technology, and trying to do better energy-wise, better yield. The yield is very important. For many metals, we are above the 95% that Hugo Bardi was mentioning, and this is and our goal is to go even higher.
Is it really a solution, Hugo, to look for new sources of energy, and what could they be? And if you take the example of fracking, aren't we just moving towards a new bubble, which is just prolonging the challenge but not really offering a solution?
Well, I didn't say that fracking is a solution to anything. And you have to be very careful in the way you define the problem, because the solution could be worse. So if you think you need, some people say we need fuel, then we search for a solution and we find fracking, which is a short-term solution, very expensive, very destructive for the ecosystem, bringing a lot of problems. And then after you have fracked everything you can frack, then what do you do? What is plan B? Have you thought about that? Everybody's so happy. Oh, we're getting oil out of shales. Okay, for how long? 10 years, maybe, if you're lucky. You look at the International Energy Agency data, and they say it very clearly. They don't plot it, but they say it. Maybe 10, 15 years, if you're lucky, So if I say energy, it is because no civilization can subsist without energy. We can be very efficient. It's very nice to be efficient, and we have to, because the abundance that we had with oil at the beginning, you know the story of the energy yield of oil. Probably know if you are here. You know the story. You have to invest 1 barrel of oil to get 100 barrels of oil at the beginning. You know this, right? Tell me. Now you have to invest about 1 barrel of oil to get maybe 10 to 15 barrels, which changes things a lot. And so it's a losing proposition to keep going into fossil fuels, because you're just moving into an upgrade which gets steeper all the time. As you extract, your yield goes down. So you need energy, but you need energy which is free, available, not polluting, not destroying the ecosystem, and which can last a lot of time. And that ladies and gentlemen, we have only one possibility here. We call it renewable, which works. Maybe it's not so good as it was oil 100 years ago. Gives you a yield which goes from 10 to 30, which is good, but not wonderful. But it is what we have. And with what we have, we can build up an industrial society. Because if we don't invest in renewable energy, then we are in an energy trap. The more we need energy, the less we have. And then we get to a point in which we don't have enough to continue with an industrial society. And that for some people may be good. I don't know, you people are here because you want to go back to agriculture, right? You spent your time digging in, not all of you. Okay, so you see, just asking you a question. Do you have some idea of how much money has been spent, let's say 2012, we have the data for 2012, in fossil fuel, development of new resources in fossil fuels, and development of new resources in renewable energy? You guess which one is the higher? Your opinion, guess it. You're smiling. Which one do you think? Fossil fuels, you got it. About 4 times as much. More than $600 billion spent for new fossil fuel development, new drilling and developing and exploring. Slightly more than $200 billion for renewables. So we have to reverse this trend. If we reverse this trend, then we have energy for recycling, then we have energy for being efficient, then we have energy for the blue economy. But even the blue economy needs energy, otherwise doesn't work.
I'd like to add 2 things. One is, fully supporting what you say about fracking, there is a shale gas and oil field in North America called Bakken, with double K. That's the size, more or less, of Germany. A huge field. And then I saw the curve of its, production potential. And it goes like that. Beginning in 1 year, and then going down, going down, going down. After 6 years, it's gone. So exactly what you say. A huge, it used to be the biggest hope of the whole shale community. But another thing I'd like to also add, I'm all in favor of renewables. Actually, I was member of parliament in Germany when we invented this feed-in tariffs law. And it was a great success story. But we also have to calculate how much can we do. The EU has a commitment of doing 20% renewable energies by 2020, which is quite a daring proposal. But this is for 500 million people. And let us optimistically assume that another 500 million from other OECD countries also does 20% of renewables by 2020. How much of the world problem will that solve? And the answer is 1/35th, because 20% is a fifth of 100, and 1 billion is a seventh of 7 billion. Now you multiply the two, it's 35. And now imagine a 35-fold increase of palm oil plantations, of corn plantations, of rapeseed, of windmills, of all the other renewables. For all my love for renewables, I simply have to say this is not going to work for ecological reasons. So in addition to exploiting what is technically available and ecologically acceptable, we also have to work on efficiency.
Ernst, one more question to add to that. You're also co-chairing the United Nations Environment Panel. We've been talking about peaks in minerals in energy. How do we go about this on international scale, given the fact that we see some concentrations of minerals in certain countries? This will become a global challenge, and we've been trying to invite China to the UNEP panel. How do we go about this geopolitical situation with every region, every continent trying to get hold of the energy and the materials?
It's actually called the International Resource Panel, but it has been founded by the United Nations Environment Programme in Nairobi. And the other co-chair used to be my predecessor as co-president of the Club of Rome. His name is Ashok Khosla from India, a great guy. His company has created some 3 million jobs in rural India, directly and indirectly. He's my hero. Anyway, the International Resource Panel is looking into metals recycling. They found out that all the specialty metals enjoy recycling rates below 1% worldwide. And then we need Umicore and others who have been working on strategies to improve that. We don't reach 95% for metals like the rare earths or gallium or indium or so, but at least from below 1% to something like 50%, that is a possibility. But then in terms of strategy, what do we have to do in addition to having good companies? Well, last week here in Brussels, during the Green Week, we presented a new report by our panel called Decoupling, Decoupling 2. And in this, we are defining a potential strategy open for use by countries, saying, let us each year increase the price of energy, of water, of minerals, by as many percent as in the previous year the efficiency has increased. So that what you are paying on a daily or monthly basis for your energy services doesn't get more expensive. You then also have to take care of the poor people in the society with a sort of lifeline tariff, as they do in South Africa. And you have to somehow protect the energy-intensive industry, but not by giving them cheap energy, but by installing an incentive into the industry, but on a revenue-neutral basis so they don't leave. So those are technical details. The main point is establishing a ping-pong between rising energy or resource prices, rising resource productivity, and if that productivity rises, prices go up. And this ping-pong is the analogy to what we had with human labor and wages. Labor productivity rose, and then the workforce could get higher wages. When the wages got higher, the incentive to increase labor productivity went up. And this ping-pong worked for 100 years or more, leading to a 20-fold up to 50-fold increase of labor productivity, which is the basis of our wealth. But today, labor is not in short supply, nor is it inefficient, but resources are in short supply and are inefficient. So let us establish the new ping-pong, and I sense that the people in the EU Commission, like Janez Potočnik, the Commissioner for Environment, they love the idea. Of course, it will be difficult to get it politically agreed, but I believe with the intellectual kind of enlightenment that this could make us richer, I believe we will find a democratic majority.
Denis, Ernst has talked about the pressure on the supply. You as a company have been talking a lot about the possibilities of the urban mine. Do you see really potential in, well, a growing aspect to this in your business model?
Yeah, I think urban mining can play a big role because the 95+% I mentioned is that when something gets into our plant, we get 95% out. The thing is that for many, many metals, just even precious metals, There is a lot of gold in electronic scrap. A lot of scrap, a lot of electronic goods are lost, are just discarded. Cell phones, we get very low recycling rate for cell phones. We have the technology to recycle cell phones. We get the gold and the palladium and the copper and nickel and tin and name it, 17 metals out of an old cell phone. So there is growth potential. If all of you would even not keep your old cell phone in a drawer, but just recycle them, that would help. Please give it to somebody that can use it, if it is a working cell phone. But if it is really obsolete or broken, just bring it back, and we can at least avoid grams of precious metals or tons of precious metals not being extracted from the ground. So yes, there is potential. Now, will it be enough to solve the world problem and the needs of 7 billion people? I'm afraid not. And so that's why we also need a good, efficient, environmental friendly mining industry, because sometimes you need, the beauty of the metals is that you can recycle them many, many times. If you have gold in your jewels, maybe some of the gold was mined by the Egyptians 3,000 years ago, because you don't lose them. They are well collected. That's the beauty of metal, but you need to start from a stock, from an inventory. And for some metals, we just don't get them. If you want to give a fridge to people in the third world, you need some steel, you need some copper, and so let's make sure that this is mined in a proper way, in a clean way, that you don't damage the environment, that you don't damage health, and that you maximize the yield and the energy, you minimize the energy which is needed. And once it will be in the circuit, if you are efficient in collecting, then we can recycle forever. And that's I think, the positive way. There will be a need for fresh resources. Let's do it in a good way, but let's at least make sure that we don't waste it. That's the main message.
Just a question to the audience. How many people, if you have an old cell phone or an old laptop in the drawer? I think this is usually the answer we get when we ask this question. So then the next question, of course, is how do we go about the behavioral change? Because we can tell the story. I think most of you know the story. And I think we need the companies, we need the research, well, to tackle this. But how about the civil society? How can we reach the individual citizen to, well, we only talk about a cell phone in the drawer, about a laptop. How do we get this idea to the people that they should play a role as well?
Well, thank you, and thank you, Guido. As a matter of fact, you said what I wanted to say as a kind of conclusion, that we at the Club of Rome, we wish to inspire, to change behavior, of course giving the example, and to fight against this trend in mainstream thinking, markets, 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 markets as much as possible, and less government, state, civic participation. So that's a long story, and it includes, of course, political choices. We're not going to discuss it here. But I think the Club of Rome has to contribute to this debate.